Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Hisham Mundol, Chief Advisor for India at the Environmental Defense Fund, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all and to moderate this session. Today we're launching the Reset Network, a new international network connecting researchers and decision makers across the Global South working on equitable energy transitions. This session is part of a series of regional launches taking place this week, the others being in Africa and the Americas. The idea today is simple: to highlight some of the leadership already coming from the Global South on energy transitions, to talk honestly about the challenges ahead, and to explore how the Research Network can help bridge some of these gaps. A quick housekeeping note before we begin. This session is being recorded and the recording will be available on the Reset website. A request for today: we really want this to be as interactive as we can possibly make it. So during the discussion, please do send in questions through the Zoom question and answers option that you have. We'll try and get to as many as we can. To start off, let's watch a short video about one example of collaboration already happening through this network, a dialogue on fair labor transitions that brought together researchers, policymakers, and labor leaders. Let's take a look.
I am Luis Fernandez Entrego. I grew up in Mexico City, in a country where millions of people work in the informal economy: street vendors, small-scale farmers, domestic workers. When I started studying how climate policy affects labor markets, I kept running into the same problem. Most of the frameworks were designed for countries with formal employment, strong unions, and social safety nets. They didn't fit places like Mexico, or Nigeria, or India. We have seen across the world that climate policies can falter when distributional impacts are ignored. Rising energy prices, job insecurity, and regional decline can quickly erode public and political support. Just transition measures are not optional. They are policy enablers essential for making decarbonization politically and socially durable. One of our first major projects asked a simple question: what happened to workers when an energy system changed? My colleagues and I conducted a comparative analysis across 14 countries in the global north and south, combining economic modeling with qualitative expert input. What we found is that challenges in developing countries are fundamentally different. When half your workforce is informal, you can rely on unemployment insurance or retraining programs that assume people have formal contracts. When there's no social safety net, a mine closure doesn't just mean a career change, it can mean a family crisis. We produce a progress scale that benchmarks where countries stand on labor-focused just transition, a tool we hope other nations can use to identify their own gaps and priorities. From there, we convene an international dialogue, interviewing over 30 experts and bringing together trade unionists, labor economists, energy company veterans, and policymakers across 4 sessions. That process identified 5 key challenges, from the mismatch between where jobs disappear and where green jobs emerge, to the risk that informal workers get left out entirely, to that enormous financing gap. The results were published in Nature Communications and have been accessed over 12,000 times, which tells me it hit a nerve. But just transition goes beyond labor. It includes access to affordable energy, fair prices, strong institutions, and inclusion, especially for groups historically left out like women and informal workers. Markets matter, but they must be designed to account for equity and not just efficiency. What I have learned from this work is that Global South doesn't need adapted versions of rich country solutions. It needs its own solutions, designed by local researchers who understand the institutional capacity, the labor informality, the development priorities of their own countries. That's what the Reset Network is building, a space where those researchers connect, share tools and data, and produce the kind of evidence that can unlock climate finance, shape regulation, and give governments the confidence to move forward. Because a transition that leaves people behind isn't just not fair, it's a transition that won't last.
Thank you. Suchi, if we could move to the slides, please. I hope that video gave you a sense of the philosophy behind Reset. And I have a few slides where I'm just going to quickly walk you through what Reset is, why are we doing it, and then how are we looking to advance it. Next slide, please. Let me start with three numbers. 3/4 of the world's cost-effective climate mitigation needs to happen in the Global South. Yet, only about 20% of global clean energy investment flows to the Global South. At the same time, roughly 2/3 of the world's population in these countries, 2/3 of the population lives in these countries, and many of them face energy poverty. These numbers exclude China, incidentally, but that kind of paints you the picture of the dilemma that we're facing. And it isn't just a climate challenge. It is also one of the largest development and investment opportunities of the coming decades. Next slide, please. The obvious question that then gets asked is, why isn't the investment flowing? When you talk to policymakers and researchers across the Global South, a few themes come up again and again. First, the evidence base isn't always locally grounded. Countries often rely on models or analyses that they can't fully access or adapt. Second, many planning tools are closed or proprietary, which means governments and other stakeholders can't really own their own energy planning. The third is that different pieces of the puzzle, modeling, economic analysis, social impacts, often happen in separate silos. And finally, too many international initiatives arrive, publish a report, and leave, without leaving behind lasting local capacity. Reset was created to try and change this. Next slide, please. So what is Reset? Reset stands for reimagining South-led energy transitions. In today's day and age, I feel the need to give a disclaimer clause that there was no AI compute power deployed to come up with this. This was good old-fashioned human intelligence. It's an international network bringing together researchers and decision makers across the Global South to support credible, locally grounded energy transition planning. This network is coordinated by the Environmental Defense Fund, and it grew out of the MCET network, which many of you already know for its work on energy modeling. Quite a few of you, I suspect, are members of it. One thing that's important to emphasize, Reset does not intend to advocate specific policy pathways. Its role is to support rigorous, transparent analysis that helps countries make their own decisions. Next slide, please. There are three pillars, three connected pillars that the work of this network sits across. The first is economics-based policy solutions, research and dialogue around issues like carbon pricing, climate finance, and fair labor transitions. The second is energy systems modeling, particularly open source models that countries can adapt to their own contexts. And the third is policy evaluation, understanding what's actually working and what isn't as policies are implemented. So what makes RESET different is that these pieces talk to each other. So modeling informs economic analysis informs policy, and policy outcomes feed back into better modeling. Next slide, please. So how does RESET seek to work? It's built around a few core principles. It's South-led, it's collaborative, and wherever possible, it works with open tools and shared knowledge. That means things like South-South collaboration between research teams, capacity building through training and small grants, and dialogue that brings researchers and policymakers into the same room. In short, the goal is to strengthen the ecosystem around energy transition planning in the Global South. And with that, I'd like to show you another short example, this time from the Dominican Republic, where collaboration across the network helped support national energy planning. Let's take a look.
The RESET network works on energy system transformation because we know that governments are under pressure to deliver a rapid, cost-effective energy transition. Our work in the Global South brings together credible models, transparent data, and most importantly, people with experience who know how to connect technical analysis to real policy choices. I am Rodrigo Borges. I grew up in Santiago, Chile, and I am now an environmental economist and part of the RESET network management. Over the few decades, Chilean economists and modelers have designed and implemented green taxes, built nationally calibrated electricity models, worked across government, university, and civil society, and translated complex modeling into actionable policy. Chile was a mirror that showed we could model whatever question people had and provide all the information needed to diagnose a solution. Experienced Chilean modelers work alongside the Dominican Republic Ministry of Energy and Mines and connected in local academics and technical teams. Together, we built a national electricity model, specifically for the Dominican Republic, that was calibrated against real historical data.
So the country was getting a lot of investment opportunity, but we simply did not have the tools or the software or the in-house capacity to make evidence-based policy decisions and know from all these opportunities which one is the best one in the long term. This kind of gap really was, I would say, a restriction for us. The team really helped bridge this gap by aligning our institutional needs with practical open source modeling solutions that were transparent, peer reviewable, and accessible. And honestly, we did not have the budget to go and hire consultants to analyze each one of these potential solutions.
The model we built was open, the assumptions were transparent, and we discussed the result weekly. The goal was to eventually make any external expert unnecessary. It was all about building trust.
But I think the best thing is that they helped us create like a knowledge community where there was a lot of transfer of this information. So it was not a one-time thing.
As experienced economists and modelers, we know that just transition policy must be tailored by different jurisdictions. Institutional capacity, electricity system models, and technical capability are different everywhere. Collaboration across the Global South can bridge gaps, reduce risk, improve policy credibility, and unlock international finance more quickly. The RESET Network's aims is to move beyond high-level principles and support real-world decision-making. We are building models and tools informed by experience and tailored to local situations. Our open source models are not an impenetrable black box. They are designed to build capacity and help governments connect knowledge to decisions. The experience we have had of Chile MSET team working with Dominican Republic means we know this type of collaboration can work and will boost a just energy transition across the Global South.
Thanks. I hope that example showed what is possible and what can happen when local capacity, good analysis, and international collaboration come together. And that's really what we're going to be discussing for today and the work of the Reset Network going forward. At this point, I'm really pleased to introduce my fellow conversationalists on today's panel. Dr. Thuy Doan is from the Fulbright School of Public Policy and Management in Vietnam. Dr. Feng is a professor and chair of energy economics at Renmin University in China. And Dr. Vaibhav Chaturvedi is senior fellow at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water in India. Welcome to all three of you. I'm going to ask each of you to come on and place two questions for you. But I just want to give a reminder to all of the participants today. The whole idea is to make it interactive. So as you hear the panelists speak, if you've got questions, keep feeding them into the Q&A. The two questions for the three of you are, firstly, from your experience working on energy transitions in the Global South, what is one success story that you've seen and one challenge that still needs resolving? So one success and one challenge. And the second question is, what role can stronger engagement between researchers and decision makers play in accelerating progress? We'll go in this order: Thuy, then Son, then Vaibhav. Thuy, let me start with you.
Thank you, Hisham. So do you prefer me to answer all the two questions at once? Okay.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So thank you. From my experience working on energy transitions in Vietnam and collaborate with other fellow broader Global South, I think one success story is how the rigorous power system modeling have to shape the policy conversations. Like in Vietnam recently, the debate is no longer about whether to decarbonize or not, but increasingly about how to do it in a way that maintains energy security, affordability, and industrial competitiveness. So through long-term capacity expansion modeling, we've shown that high shares of renewables can be technically feasible and economically competitive in Vietnam and other developing countries. So if accompanied by appropriate pricing reform or grid investments and market design, then we can make it. But what makes this impactful was not just the technical rigors, but importantly the relevance. So the research directly addressed the question that policymakers were actively grappling with at that moment. So, and that leads to the main challenge that's it's not, the challenge is not about the technical modeling capacity, but in my opinion, it's more on the side of institutional coordinations and political economy. So energy transition decisions, it will affect the effectiveness really wide, broadens. So it's not only affect the state-owned enterprise, but also private investors, workers, and consumers, and in different ways. So even when the technical optimal pathway are clear, the implementation requires alignment across many ministries, agencies, and across economic priorities. And in fast-growing economies, climate ambition must constantly be balanced with development objectives. And that tensions make just transition not just kind of not a moral question, but a deeply structural questions. So also in my experience, the timing matters as much as the technical rigors because the research is most influential when it's directly answer the policy question that decision makers are currently facing. So if research focus on a potential long-term risk that's not yet political recognized, then it might be technically strong and like a good answers, but it have limited in immediate tractions. So this is why I think engagements must go beyond like publishing report or publishing article. But the most effective work that I've been involved in have been codified with the like electric regulatory authorities, and where the research question emerge from the real policy dilemmas, such as like the electricity retail pricing that Vietnamese policymakers are working on right now. And so, however, as an individual researchers or even a single university like mine in Vietnam, our impact can be sometimes like be limited by the scale and visibility. So I think the international network like research can elevate the locally crowded research by providing peer validation and especially the cross-country comparisons and a broader platform to communicate our research findings and policy messages. So I think that's the amplification matters, and it can be done with the strengthened research that's like connected our local expertise within the countries and across country over the global south. I think that can have opened the door for dialogues and sustainability. So I think that's what I have. Thanks.
Well, thanks a ton. A few things struck out from what you were saying. One is the fact that this isn't just a moral question that we need to work on. There are, profound structural challenges that we need to address. I love the way you framed it about beyond just writing a report, but actually engaging with policymakers, decision makers, because they face dilemmas and it's really hard choices that they have. And the more that we're able to provide them objective analysis, it doesn't give you a guarantee of the best decision, but it improves the chances of success of that decision. And the last piece, which again is something that research is trying to do, is amplification matters, I think is the words that you use. Individual nodes are helpful, but when you put them all together and you do things like the cross-country comparisons, thanks for that. I'm sure we'll come back to this, but could I pass it on to you now, Dr. Sohn?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for the question. And I work primarily domestic in China, so I didn't have much collaboration with other global South countries. But my experience with the successful energy transition is based in my observation in China. I give two examples. One is the EV cars, the electric cars. So this is a very successful story. I probably you have read somewhere on the news. Chinese EV cars. I know is also exporting to other countries. So, but this EV cars actually, when I came back to China from US after I finished my PhD in 2010, is 16 years ago. back to that time, China was dominant by the few cars, the normal cars. And the EV cars were promoted by the government for a long time, but it wasn't so successful because of infrastructure things, the charging and also the cost is relatively expensive. But after year after year, the industrial policies, not only the industrial policy, but also other technical progress, I think, with the batteries, not only in China, but also in the United States. Actually, I think the very big motivation for China the consumer education of the EV car actually is a Tesla. The Tesla, I think the Tesla's charging station networks were actually built by a bunch of rich people who bought, not relatively rich, people who bought the Tesla cars, and they traveled. I saw the news. They traveled during our Chinese New Year, but they couldn't find enough charging stations to build by themselves. So that actually that's kind of a commercial education for the consumers. Started like 7 or 8 years ago. So with this wave now in China, if you come to China, you'll find in Beijing, even further south to the country, you will see more and more EV cars, even without the governmental subsidies for the consumers. They will buy the EV cars. Why? Because EV cars now is so functional. A lot of young people, they feel it drives so comfortable, and the interior space is so functional. It's like integrated with all the digital devices. It's considered as a mobile home. It's very comfortable to stay in the car. You can use their sofa and watch the videos, and you can use the automatic driving style. So a lot of my friends, I don't drive because I live very close to my campus, but my friends, if now they want to buy a car, they just buy the EV cars, even no subsidies, even with the similar price, they will go to the EV cars. So it's very similar. It's a very successful story. But when you look at this story, when I think about this story, whether it can scale up or adopted by other developing countries or global South countries, that's the question. So a lot of things like the development of renewables, the solar, wind in China is also not a successful story. The cost of the solar and wind, like 15 years ago, is 3 or 4 times of the coal-fired power in China, but now is cheaper. It's even cheaper than the coal-fired. So, but if you look at this successful story in China, a big thing is China is a big manufacturing country. The manufacturing percentage in terms of the percentage in the global share is rising. So that means a lot of other countries' share is low. Not only for United States, like the developed countries, but also other global South countries. So I think the manufacturing capacity is very key for modernization, for industrialization, for keeping up the living standard of people. I grew up. My personal experience is you feel the rising of your living standard. You witness how your living standard from very small house to very big house, from no car to car, from the train. When I was in university, I took the train from my university to school. It usually takes more than 10 hours for the train back home, but now it takes 3 or 2 hours back home. So you see the huge improvement of your own personal living standard. But back to that is a huge manufacturing capacity of China. How other global South country can develop this capacity and to cope. That capacity is not only for living standard, but also the ability to cope with climate change and other risks. That's I think the key too. So my puzzle, I think the challenge is to push up to give the good China's good license to other countries, developing countries. That's my talk.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. I did not know the Tesla story as you described it, and it's fascinating. I think one thing to just keep in mind for the audience is that outside of China, when you read or hear more about the EV success and the solar success, there is so much in China's broader economic strategy that is driving this. This is a climate question for sure, and there is a climate requirement, but it is so much bigger than that. It is about jobs. It's about exports. It's about manufacturing competitiveness, and so much of these decisions were taken by really high quality analysis and modeling that has gone through. So thank you for that. Vaibhav, if I could pass it on to you.
Great. Thank you, Hisham and Idia, for giving me this opportunity. Very interesting conversation. I'll focus on the second question, which is about engagement with decision makers. And I think I'll put it in the modeling context because the research network is trying to, facilitate that kind of, quantitative analysis and its, implications for informing policy. So I think it will be obvious to say that engagement is critical. Of course, it is critical. I think it's important to emphasize that it is engagement strategy that is a lot critical, and I think that is we should all modelers should definitely differentiate between just and thinking about engagement as you could go to a policymaker and directly engage with them based on, let's say, the analysis you've done, based on the capacity that has been built through the reset network. It's an engagement strategy, and it is not really so obvious, because it is not just about policymakers. The moment you think about engagement strategy, it is a lot broader with a much bigger, wider community, and the community has policymakers, but it also has industry experts. It also has other disciplines, within your ecosystem, which are also probably non-modeling disciplines that are extremely important. So essentially, there is a larger knowledge pool about this energy transition, just energy transition, and modelers have to place our knowledge within that larger modeling, larger context, knowledge context. And it's not just about going to this one, policymaker to inform them, but you have to actually inform that larger network, because ultimately, when we do all this modeling analysis, we are coming up with certain, you could say, arguments in the debate, that this is the way we should be thinking about things, something like that, and all of many other colleagues from different disciplines, industry sector, they have different perspectives. Right? So these kinds of dialogues, it's like today's dialogue, I find these very powerful, because it's all about listening to other colleagues. In this context, we are talking about international context, but something very similar in domestic context also. So when we listen to all our colleagues from very different contexts, within India or let's say abroad, I think the learning is very powerful. And that is, so the engagement strategy ultimately is not just about that one-way street that you do research, you place it out there. Engagement is also a lot more about what we are learning from the larger ecosystem within your country and outside the country. Once we are able to do that, we are able to place our knowledge in a much, you could say, much more realistic context. We are able to also inform many others in the ecosystem. And the hope is that the same kind of recommendation, it's not just your recommendation. The whole, I think, a very important part is, do our others in the larger ecosystem agree with your recommendation, agree with your perspective, they agree with your, sort of solution or argument. Once all those things happen, which is tricky, but only then, your engagement strategy ultimately will end up being successful. And from, at least from the Reset Network's perspective, which is trying to build modeling capacities, it's, I think, extremely important because deep modeling capacities are a prerequisite for any engagement strategy to be successful. Because there are many different kinds of models, So rather than getting into this whole conversation about which is a better model, which is a pointless kind of conversation, it's very important for many of our peers to come together, focus on uncertainty spans, think that the arguments that are a lot more robust and that many other alternative modeling analysis also are also supporting. So thinking about more sort of collaborative, a deeper modeling capacity in an ecosystem is extremely important. And I think what I've learned in sort of my engagement in India, at least with decision makers, the Achilles heel for modelers is communication. It's very clear. Communication comes. It is very tough for modelers, and it's easy to show a graph with numbers and everything, but communicating it is like we do extremely bad job. We are examples of how a job should not be done most of the time. So I think it's extremely important to learn from many different people how to communicate, because the analysis, I think it's very solid, very robust, but many times once you are not able to communicate that analysis, then it becomes you're not really utilizing the full power of the analysis. And I think in this reset network, I think that's something very important also, that it's not just about doing good analysis, but it's also about learning this whole tricks or strategies for communicating this analysis to a variety of stakeholders, including the policymakers. Ultimately, what we want is building trust in the ecosystem. So when you do, so if, for example, open source, very, very important, transparently communication of all these assumptions, these things are very, very important. But doing all of this, ultimately what we're trying to do is build trust. So building trust means you are also trying to understand what the other person is trying to say, from modeler or not model community, whichever. So I think those are very important themes from CEEW's perspective also. We try to, I think we learn tremendously, not just from doing our own desk research, but I think it just read what others are doing. Opinion pieces like from you write a lot, Hisham, many other colleagues do excellent technical analysis. Learning from all those analysis makes our research a lot better. And I think it's when the whole ecosystem grows together, each individual team is a lot more effective in its own engagement strategy. So I think it has imperative to build kind of an ecosystem which makes each of us individually also a lot more stronger, and we are able to communicate this kind of technical analysis that we do ultimately for engagement and informing policy. I think those things are a lot more productive. That's what I've learned in the past few years. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I couldn't agree with you more on the need to get better and better at communication. Not all of us are natural born public orators, but everyone can make a little bit of an improvement there. I think one challenge that we could kind of almost set ourselves is, for every piece of research work, how much of the effort and money and time goes into the actual research and how much of it goes into the communication and the engagement, and getting more of a fair balance between spending enough time and money on the communications and engagement is essential. And I think it ties back with what Thuy had said, saying how do we sit with policymakers and try and hear what they're trying to say and try and convince them about what are the actual choices that they have available for them. Thanks so much, all of you, for that. Another call out to the audience. Please do keep your send in questions in the Q&A, and more than happy to take them. But Vaibhav, just sticking with you for a moment, I wanted to ask you on the role of international cross-sector dialogue in finding different ways to approach old problems. You spoke about the value of speaking to or sharing insights and information. You've recently participated in an EDF-led dialogue on equity in global carbon markets. Thank you for your time then. Can you reflect on how the conversation with the participants in this either changed or clarified your thinking on how global carbon markets could contribute to equitable transition?
Yes, I think, as I said, those dialogues are very powerful. And because you learn about many different contexts and how different experts within these different contexts are approaching a problem that sounds very similar, but the nuances could be very different. So, first thing is you learn those difference in nuances in different contexts. Then you also learn how different experts are thinking about in terms of solutions within these different contexts. And once you are able to learn a lot of those things, then ultimately, because your context could be a bit different, so you will have to reflect. But I think what we have definitely found, maybe the way we were reflecting on our context and trying to think about solutions, that definitely changes. So once from this particular dialogue that you're referring to, at least I never thought, I'm a economist more on the you could say right side. So think things like equity are, we know it's very important, but placing equity at the heart of every conversation doesn't come very naturally to many of us. So I think carbon market I was approaching and my team was approaching from initially when we started, from a very different approach, a very market oriented kind of approach. But of course, once you go to these kinds of dialogues and you listen to so many people, experts from different contexts, their experiences, what does equity mean in practice? I think that was my learning, big learning. And now I think in a lot of work that we are doing at carbon markets, of course, one is the technical part of informing the design and all that. So ultimately having that perspective, of equity and what does it mean and how could you deliver on that? At least that it was a big motivation for my team now. So I think a lot of that came after we started thinking based on that particular dialogue that I attended. But generally speaking, it's all about learning from perspectives coming out from many of these different contexts, which view this very similar idea, but in a very different, nuanced way based on their own contexts.
Yeah, and it's powerful that you brought out this concept of equity, because the fact is that I'm sure if you ask each of us in this small group, we'll have, 4 very different understandings of what equity means. It means different things in different countries within a country. One state will have a different perspective on the other. So thanks for that. I was going to move to ask you, Professor Sohn, on carbon pricing. Your country's been your team, sorry, has been studying the Chinese emission trading system. It's the world's largest. And I think what would be helpful for audiences outside of China would be, what has China's experience taught us about the gap between what carbon pricing can theoretically achieve and what can it actually deliver in practice?
Okay, thank you. Yes, as a trained economist, we were all taught that the carbon pricing is the most efficient way to tackle the climate change. If you give the correct price signal of the external cost of the carbon, you will have everything right. But as you said, is in practice it's not that way. It's very for China's ETS, is the largest in terms of, because China is the largest emitter worldwide of the carbon, China launches his piloting programs like in, I think, in 2012, probably 15 years ago. So it was is very small scale, and different provinces or cities have their own own design of the market. I think it's just exploring how you can do it. And 5 years ago, in 2021, we launched the national market covering all the coal power plants. It accounts for 42%, probably 42% of the national carbon emission. So after 5 years of running, I think in the next 5 years, the carbon market is going to expand several more energy intensive industries like the steel, cement, or these kind of industries. So I think from the experience, several things emerged. First, I feel, as we discussed, I think several other experts talked about that the institution, cost institution around the policy is very important for implementing the carbon policy. As you said, as you see, is a carbon pricing or trading system is not there automatically. If you want to the firms or the plants to do the carbon reduction thing, you need to have the infrastructure, the institutional infrastructure, such as you need to have the carbon accounting, how much they emit. You need the MRV, the monitoring, reporting, verification, all the system. So you do that step by step. So I think our piloting program also for the 5 years launch of the national market is get the ball rolling, just kick out the game. I think so. You have I think is kind of you do it learning by doing, not only for the firms but also for the governments. For the government is a capacity building process. The local officials, when I interact with them, a lot of them have very, very, very little knowledge about the carbon accounting. Some of them just, at the very beginning, I talked with a local government official. He mistakenly, confused the coal, the carbon with the carbon asset. They say, we have a lot of coal underground. We will have a lot of carbon asset. So it's just, this conceptual ability for the local governments is also needed to be improved. The process of building the market is a process of learning for the government, for the market participants, and for the normal people. Because China also doing, trying to educate people. You can buy, renewable certificates, or you can later on you may do something on the carbon market. So all those are process for the developing countries. For other countries, I think is also like the story of not only for the climate changes, but for the whole development story. I think that's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and so much of what you said resonates with the experiences that we are seeing. For example, in India, every state government that you talk to will tell you, we want to know more about carbon pricing, tell us more. And I think that's a good thing, because that suggests that, there is appetite to learn more about it. And sometimes the constraining factor is just time capacity, how many hours can you actually put in and how many state governments can you visit? I think, the earlier point that you made about sometimes in when we look at, climate economics policies like carbon pricing, policymakers want those silver bullet solutions. If I do this, this is what I will get, and it's a nice, clean line. I think part of the challenge is also to explain that there isn't, a set of silver bullets that you can use. There are, each one have some opportunities and some constraints. And also from the other side, to think that it isn't just climate policy that policymakers are working on. They're talking about industrial strategy and economic advantage and jobs and livelihoods and trying to find that balance. It comes back to that point about engagement. Thuy, if I can come to you, the video that we showed a little while ago was on the Dominican Republic's case study, and it showed one model of South-South collaboration. We're here because we want to see many more of them. You've been part of another, working collaboratively with modeling teams in China and India, amongst other places, to tackle the question of how to coordinate different aspects of clean power transition. Can you walk us through what that collaboration looks like in practice?
Yeah, thank you, Hisham. Yes, I have a chance to collaborate with colleagues from China and India team to answer a set questions at that time, like how can countries coordinate energy transition strategy and renewable technology development in the ways that are economically optimal. So back then, rather than we looking at only at national transitions in isolations, we explored whether the coordination, particularly around the renewable deployments and integrations under different constraints of technology availability, could improve the outcomes and reduce the decarbonization costs across countries. So between Vietnam, China, and India within the power system. So basically, the three countries say some structural similarity, like rapid electricity demand growth, heavy reliance on coals, and we have regional disparities that require so much more capacity of grid transmissions, and also the need to scale renewables quickly. So, but at the same time, we operate under very different institutional system and policy environments. So in practice, the other college and me work through so many of regular online meetings, say modeling assumptions and scenario designs. Then we run the same sets of scenario, then jointly interpret the scenario results with continuous peer feedback and discuss on the reasoning behind of those modeling outcomes. So that's and also importantly, the collaborations not about try to figure out the one and only model so that other countries can learn from, but we try to jointly exploring how the coordination between countries in renewable technology development and the policy for renewable integration could create mutual benefits, economic benefits across the Asian countries at that time. So that's kind of based on the collaboration with peer review feedbacks and technically rigorous collaboration. We try to answer a shared question, taking into account the difference between countries and the difference at the status like the point that each country currently standing on the energy transition path to take into account every difference and similarity to figure out the chance or the opportunities in coordination, renewable technology developments and integration. So that's kinds of thing I think like the peer-based and technically rigorous collaboration is some kinds of cooperation between South countries that I'm looking for, and I believe that it's gonna benefit many other members. And I also hope that the research can have scales because basically our coordinate or collaboration projects were somehow based on individual relationships, and I hope that an international network, not just research but also other network, can have like institutionalized those kinds of collaboration and make it like more systematic rather than dependence on some kind of like personal relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You hinted at a couple of things that I wanted to probe a little bit. The differences between countries. One of the challenges is that the Global South is such a wide umbrella and it's got so many different countries. When you're, investing your time and mind space in collaboration, you spoke about, the calls that you need to be part of, or you want to, speak to somebody else, etc. There's sometimes a challenge that you hear these examples from other countries, and then part of your head is saying, that's just too far away from my context. I give you an example. Many times when I hear about what's happening in China, I say, oh wow, that's great, but it's just so far, it's so different from where India is or some other country is. How do you handle that in practice? You hear 5 different scenarios, none of which are directly where you are. How do you then distill, something that I can take from here and something that I can take from somewhere else?
I think it's just I wouldn't not know everything about every other country, so we just like try to understand more about other contexts by like talking frequently with other colleagues from other teams. So we, especially for comparisons, comparative studies, we need to try to figure out the reasoning behind of each like modeling outcome, each like number that we got from the models. So we need to know like in fact how was the policy going on there, how was the historical developments of energy or electricity sector there, and the shape of the country, the regional characteristic and many other things. So it's much via like continuously discussion, conversation, feedback questions, and like sometimes debate to figure out and to make us like arise kind of like at the same page, understand each other, and like and also on during the whole kinds of conversation and debate, we try to aim to a mutual goals. That's like we need to understand it to answer these questions, and in order to make kind of like comprehensive picture about the comparative lesson from the across country scenario that we just done, and try to give out to the audience or the policymakers.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing you say is don't be too stuck about the specific data points from individual countries. It's more useful to think about what was the thinking process behind the decisions that were taken, what were the insights that you can learn from one country and maybe adapt or take to your. Thanks for that. Professor Sona, I wanted to come to you. You spoke about the EVs and the solar story in China. I wanted to discuss the interaction between the electricity sector reform, renewable energy, and carbon pricing. You've worked extensively on this complex interaction between the electricity sector and the renewable energy development. Can you tell us a bit about how you and your team have tackled this area with not seeking to just identify problems, but also contributing to solutions? Because one of the challenges is everyone is first up to say this is wrong, that is wrong, but not everyone always looks at, so what can we do about it?
Yeah. I think it's very interesting because our team is my apartment is all economics training based. We work in we are in the School of Applied Economics at Renmin University. So all our faculty members are economics training background. We actually involved in the electricity reform, power reform in China very early, 10 years ago, when this round of reform initiated. We just started involvement. So I think we are the only, not only probably, but we have the largest group of economists who work in this area. So we had experience working with policymakers, industry experts, industry practice people. So this is very different from the academic job. I don't know whether you I think you know some of our audience know the academic work is very different from the policy work. So the economic perspective is also very different from the engineering perspective or the policy perspective. So I think when we work with policymakers or the engineers, the first thing is to listen and to learn. So economists always started something from the models, our ideal world. We have the benchmark model we use as a ruler to measure things in the reality. At least I think some of our economists are doing that. But if you work with in practice, you want to make a real impact, not only come up with numbers or models in a journal article. You need to listen and to understand what's the complexity of the reality, the real risk constraint. Those are environments you need to come up with policies to fit in. So you need to, I think so, as we first thing we listen and learn, and then I think to provide insightful, because economics is really useful for the market design, for the basic supply and demand, the rules, also, although it sounds very basic, but still, you work with engineers or policymakers with various backgrounds, you really can provide our very powerful economic analysis of insights, give them a different perspective, and use a very analytical framework. I think these interactions are both useful for ourselves when we do our research and also useful for them. So the first thing is listen and learn. Second thing is to come up with good work, solid work, based on models, data, with our methodologies is really useful. They listen. So I give you example for Chinese renewable energy policy design. So after 2020, when the cost of the solar and the wind dropped so much, when policy debate is we don't want to give the money to this industry. We need them to, go to the market, compete with coal power. But still, we have the carbon peaking goal in 2060. We need them to develop. So how you balance, the market competition and the market, the electricity market design, and also the continuous support of that. So there's a policy debate how you using the policy tools. People from the engineering background, people from the coal from the power industry, people come up with like the renewable certificate, as a way to support them, or the carbon pricing, something like that. We came up with other things like the fit into the market using basically it's kind of contract for difference experience borrowed from the US, but borrowed from the EU, but tailored with China's local conditions. We give the solution, and I think we have several rounds of discussions. We invite the experts from lots of different backgrounds, like the generators, the retailers, the power changing, and the grid companies, and the planning people. We have several rounds of discussion, and we come up with a solution, come up with a policy recommendation. I think they actually, then the pricing department took our advice and just abolish their original idea. So I think that's a very good example of how the economists can contribute. We really understand the market better. We understand how the market functions, all the works. We also understand the constraint probably most. So we work with other people and we interact. We can provide our contribution. Yeah.
And what you've described is it's simple, but it's so important. Listen and learn, and you will find policymakers, industry willing to listen and learn as well, as long as we're able to make that transition from the pure academic into what is the real life situations. Sometimes there's always a tendency to look at some of these things, and from an academic theoretical point of view, you want to take some extreme situations, let's go 100% renewables on something. It's not practical. But what you do want to do is want to get to as much renewables as quickly and as effectively as you can. Vaibhav, you mentioned communications and you mentioned writing. You write a fair bit yourself. I read all your op-eds. A recent one that you wrote suggested that India needs to find a productive way to respond to global measures like the European Union's CBAM through careful management of both carbon costs, building in institutional capacity, and balancing climate ambition with equitable trade outcomes. When I read it, I was like, this makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you, how does your new thinking reflect a different perspective from that is in traditional economics literature, for instance?
Sure. Yeah, I think we were thinking more about political economy rather than traditional economics literature when we are thinking about CEEW, because a lot of it is about geopolitics. So I think that was one big motivation for us. And what we have learned is that there are different arenas in which the same country will be interacting or engaging. For example, the COP forum, which is a multilateral forum, is a very different forum compared to the bilateral forum, right? The objectives are different, the contexts are different, and the ministries that are engaging are also very different. So what I think what we are essentially saying that it's not that this development on the EU FTA front will change anything in the multilateral forum. You could still expect to see India still, talking very loudly about like this unilateral trade measure at that forum. So that will continue to happen. But the geopolitical context for the bilateral relationship has evolved because of whatever President Trump is doing. So now I think that has pushed a lot of things, not just in India but in many other countries. Just basically trying to ensure that whatever rough edges were there in terms of or differences were there, well, maybe keep some of them aside, for the moment, just because this context is so different and it is evolving so rapidly. It was something similar that happened within India, Japan. So the JCM deal was signed, which was stuck for years, but suddenly it was signed. Something similar happened in the EU FTA also, because the deal was so much more important, and I think it's fantastic for both countries from the just the economic perspective. But just because of CBAM kind of irritants, it was held for some time. So the government took a position. Well, in this particular geopolitical scenario, it is makes a lot more sense to go ahead and keep. So we're not really keeping CBAM aside completely, but the wording is very interesting, basically there. So it is definitely some grudging acceptance. That's how I'll put it. So it's not that India is very happy about it, but grudgingly it has been accepted that CBAM is probably here to stay. And so be better prepared. Whatever that needs to be done in terms of domestic institutional capacity, MRV capacities. So all that is there. So that is what has, I think, happened. But as I said, if the geopolitical context changes, and let's say it ends up being a very different context for whatever reason in 2 years from now, I think retaliation is on the cards. We should not completely discount it. Is I think a lot of is being driven by the geopolitical scenario where now countries do want to come together. So that's what is happening. But the conversation on CBAM in India has also evolved significantly. Initially, the motivation was also this. The motivation behind India's own domestic carbon credits trading scheme (CCTS) was also somewhat CBAM initially. But now that learning has come, that well, the prices, even if we have our own system, the prices will be so different in the two contexts. Let's say in Europe, it could be 90 or 100 euros. In India, it will be 10, 15, 20, maybe for the foreseeable future. So even if you have a system for having that carbon price, as far as the economic effects are concerned, you will be able to only marginally, kind of change anything on ground. So now the whole perspective behind CCTS is it's not really for CBAM now. It is an instrument for domestic decarbonization. That is very important because carbon markets traditionally have been viewed as an instrument for international climate finance in India at developing, because we got a lot of international climate finance. So that is how it was viewed initially. Then there was the CBAM angle that because of CBAM, let's think about a domestic architecture. But now the thinking has further evolved. So it is not even an instrument for international climate finance. It's not really, I mean, CBAM, of course, it will be used, but CBAM is not now the primary motivation. Primary motivation is domestic decarbonization. So that is how the debate has evolved, which is, I think, a very interesting evolution of the debate. And on the CBAM front, we'll continue to see, I think, better preparation within the country. And hopefully there will be no retaliation, but let's see how it evolves.
Sure, thanks. While you were talking, what I was picking up was that even while we're building out this network and we want, Global South's collaboration in all of the manners that we describe, I think individually in each country, our influence will be more resilient if we act as thoughtful and trusted advisors for each individual country to pursue that country's national objectives, their development trajectories, what they see as progress. We're almost at time. Suchi, if I could go to the closing slide, please. I just want to thank our three panelists, Thuy, Son, and Vaibhav, for a really thoughtful discussion. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. And I just want to leave you with, if you'd like to stay involved with the Reset Network, there's a few ways that you can do that. You can become a member as an individual researcher or practitioner. Your organization can partner with the network more formally as an org. And if you're a funder, you can help support the expansion of this work across more countries. There is small seed funding that we've got access to, but we will need additional funding for us to expand it and to embed it. All the information that you need is on the website www.reset-network.org. I'll also encourage you to follow the network on LinkedIn or subscribe to the newsletter. The energy transition in the global south will only succeed if local researchers and decision makers are at the center of it. This is what we are looking to do. Reset is one attempt to try and make this happen. I welcome you all to Reset. I'm excited about the launch of it. Thank you again for joining us today. And I do hope this is the start of a long collaboration. Thank you very much, everyone.